Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCullum, and I'm here today at the Rock Island Auction Company taking a look at some of the guns that they're going to be selling in their upcoming September of 2017 premiere auction. And today we're looking at another submachine gun, and this is a very scarce one. This is an Italian TZ-45, and this is basically the Italian version of a last-ditch wartime submachine gun design. As the name implies, these were developed and manufactured in 1945, basically right at the end of World War II. They only manufactured about 6,000 of them. This particular one is number 2790, and it's a pretty simple design. It pretty much worked. Interestingly, after the war, these would actually go into production in Burma, of all places. They would be adopted as the standard Burmese submachine gun, as the BA-52, with a couple cosmetic changes. So the designers were able to actually probably get more monetary or more commercial success with them in Burma than they were in Italy during the war. Now, the name TZ-45 is, of course, 1945 plus the initials of the two designers. Now, pretty much all of the literature out there says that this was Tony and Zorzola Giandosa. However, I think I have reason to suspect that Giandosa was actually the name of the factory that produced these, and that Tony and Zorzoli were the first names of the designers, but they were not, in fact, brothers named Giandosa. I believe Tony was a colonel in the Italian military, and Zorzola was a designer, weapons designer, who was responsible for the mechanics of the gun. At any rate, I don't have firm proof, but I wanted to put that out there because I suspect the typical documented story is actually not correct in this case. Now, this is a simple blowback submachine gun. There's only really one thing unique and special about it, and that is the grip safety. The TZ-45 was the first submachine gun out there to actually use a device like this as a secondary safety. So it has a standard fire control safety up, well, back here at the trigger group, but in order to fire the gun or to even just manually cycle the bolt, you have to have the grip safety depressed. So let's take a closer look at that. A few basic specifications about the TZ-45. It's actually a relatively light submachine gun. I don't know if it really comes across on the camera, but it's a fairly small gun. The receiver tube is small in diameter. Everything about it is just a little bit petite. And it comes in at just about 7 pounds, just a hair over 7 pounds. That's 3.2 kilograms. So a comfortable gun to carry. Perhaps not the most comfortable to shoot with this stock, but we'll get to that in a moment. Rate of fire was about 550 rounds per minute, which is pretty typical, standard, neither particularly fast nor particularly slow. And the magazines that it used were 20 and 40 round magazines. This is 9mm parabellum. And these are actually Beretta 38 family magazines. So the guys making this one didn't make any attempt to design their own magazine. That would have been a lot of extra work, and it would have actually been counterproductive. So because they used Beretta magazines, and obviously the same ammunition, these guns could be issued out to units that also had Beretta submachine guns without really having any logistical issues with resupply. Now, let's consider this grip safety, the novel feature of this gun. Basically, what you have here is an L-shaped lever with a little round plunger that goes up into the receiver tube. It doesn't move very far. That's it. However, when this lever is up, it locks the bolt in place, whether the bolt is closed or open. So, in order to cycle the bolt for any reason, you have to have this grip safety depressed. Now, a lot of people are going to look at that and immediately decry it as the worst possible idea ever, because, and this is a justifiable concern, if you have replaced the magazine, you put a magazine in, you are presumably holding onto the gun by the pistol grip, you cannot now rack the bolt handle because you have to have a hand here before you can charge the bolt. So the reload procedure on this would be grab your new magazine, insert it into the gun, then depress the grip safety with one hand while reaching up with your firing hand to cycle the bolt. Now, the justification for this is that it absolutely is a very effective safety mechanism. If you want to prevent negligent discharges and accidental shootings with an open bolt submachine gun, a bolt locking lever like this will absolutely do the trick and do it really well. However, it does it at the expense of combat efficiency. So things like reloading the gun, as I just demonstrated, or clearing malfunctions, or simply shooting from awkward positions, or should you actually want to fire one-handed, all of those things can be severely compromised by a grip safety like this. So it comes down to a judgment call. Do you want the extra safety, or do you want the extra flexibility in shooting? And typically what designers have done is come up with some sort of middle ground, some alternative safety that's maybe not quite as effective, but pretty close, that doesn't have the downsides of a grip safety like this. Since we're here with the gun, let's take a look at all of the rest of its features. The magazine release is located here, just behind the grip safety. So the end of the barrel is set up with this little 2-slot compensator, not that different from the Beretta, the late Beretta 38 series, actually. And then this kind of goofy clown hat style of front sight post. There is a plate here under or attached to the barrel shroud, and that is actually the attachment point, or the resting point for the front of the stock bars. So these are going to come to rest right there. That keeps them from getting caught, bending on things, getting hooked on stuff, anything like that. This would also act as a good support point for the gun. If you wanted to rest the gun on something and push into it to counteract recoil, that kind of does the job of a modern vertical front grip in that regard. The rear sight looks, that doesn't look original, but it actually is. It is a little aperture sight located right about halfway back on the receiver tube. That's something the Burmese would change when they adopted this. They'd move the rear sight to the very back of the receiver. And then on the front of the trigger group, we actually have our fire selector lever. This is full auto. That is semi-auto. You can hear the disconnector working there. And then all the way up forward is the safe position, which locks the trigger. The stock is pretty simple. The butt plate is contoured to fit right up against the pistol grip so that it can be stowed like this for convenient carry. And then you just depress these two little buttons, and we can pull, there we go, pull the stock out, very much like a US M3 grease gun stock. In theory, it latches in position here, but this one doesn't really want to. So disassembly begins with this front pin here. You actually have to take the trigger group and grip unit off perpendicular to the barrel. It doesn't pivot on this pin. You take out the pin, and then we press in a plunger at the back to remove it. So we have a 2-part pin here. Push that through, and then I can pull out this side of the pin, and then use that to push out this side of the split pin. So now it's loose there. Then at the back, this plunger is actually the cap on the buffer spring inside. So we're going to push that in, and then there we go. Pull that out, catch the recoil spring as it tries to fly out. This is not actually the correct spring for this gun. However, it originally had a recoil spring and then also had this buffer spring, which is correct, in this end cap. And it actually had a floating guide rod in between. So I suspect the guide rod and spring got lost at some point, and someone has adapted this from some other gun. But once those are out, we then have to depress the grip safety in order to pull the bolt back. This is a non-reciprocating charging handle, and I'll show you how it works as soon as I take the bolt out. So there's the bolt. And then the charging handle just fell through. Once the bolt is out, the charging handle drops through that round slot in the receiver and comes out like so. There is one further element of disassembly we can do, and that is to remove the barrel. This actually has a threaded collar as a barrel nut. So if I unthread this, the barrel comes off. There is a key here that makes sure that the barrel stays in the proper orientation, but once this is off, the barrel comes out. There is your complete field stripped TZ-45. So let's take a look at a couple of the other features here. The barrel shroud here is kind of interesting, to me at least, in that it is 2 stamped pieces that are then slid over from the front of the barrel, and then they are held in place by this, the front sling swivel, and the cap, the muzzle, or the barrel nut in the back. So yeah, that's just a neat way to do that. When it's in use, the charging handle sits in this slot right on the side of the bolt, and it has a raised bar right here that sits in this track. So the charging handle can come this far back, at which point it hooks onto the bolt. This bar hits the end of that little slot, and then you can use it to cycle the bolt back. However, the rest of the time, it can slide forward. Even if the bolt is open, the charging handle remains shut and acts as a little dust cover over the open slot in the side of the receiver here. If we look down the receiver tube, you can see that safety plunger coming up into the receiver there. That is this plunger. There are 2 places where that lever can lock the bolt, either here when the bolt's all the way forward, which prevents it from coming back even, well, any distance at all, or here when the bolt is cocked and ready to fire. This semicircular cutout prevents the bolt from going forward against that plunger until the plunger is pulled down. And then this is the sear that actually engages engages with the trigger mechanism. These did not see very much production. Obviously, they didn't see all that much use either. Apparently, they were primarily used in the northern parts of Italy fighting against partisans right at the end of the war. There are not a whole lot of them floating around these days because, of course, there weren't many made in the first place. So if you'd like to have this particular one, it is an original, uncut, registered, transferable submachine gun coming up for sale here at Rock Island. If you take a look at the description text below, you'll find a link to their catalog page on it, which includes their pictures, their description, their price estimates, and so on. So if you decide that you just really want a last-ditch gun that's not German or Japanese, well, take a look. You can place a bid live here at the auction or over the phone or through their website. Thanks for watching.